So welcome to the main theme of New World, Rise of the Angry Earth. We're going to take a look at all that goes in here. My DAW of choice is Cubase, and I am using sounds coming out of a software called Vienna Ensemble Pro. So what that means is that I am hosting all the sounds on a separate computer. It could be the same computer, but it's on a separate computer. I will provide you guys with some screen captures so you can see what lives in there. But basically, most of the information I have on here is MIDI tracks like these guys, returns, audio returns like these guys with the little keyboard icon, and then some audio tracks. We're going to see hardware synthesizers that have been captured here. But without further ado, let me give you a preview of what's going on here. So what we're looking at is the session that I delivered to my mixer, essentially. Well, what would actually lead up to what's been delivered to my mixer, as well as what's been delivered to my orchestrator. And both of them did their thing, and we had recording sessions, and then my mixer ended up incorporating a lot of the sounds that we recorded into this project. So I have available to me the stereo mix of the final mix, which is what we were listening to, as well as the individual stems. The stems are the components of the mix, if you will. Here, there's like acoustic percussion, harps and pulses, ethnic woodwinds, and so on and so forth. All of these sounds comprise the stereo mix that you're hearing. And having access to the stems is really important for a number of reasons. You can create new music based off those stems. You can maybe use a different arrangement or a different mix for different sections of the game. And in the case of video game music, which this is a theme for a video game, you need to be able to adapt the music to how players are playing the game. So being able to make choices as to what is going on and what's happening at any given time using stems is a crucial way of doing this. So we're going to take a look at the session right now. I typically like to organize my Cubase sessions very much like I like to see things on paper, on the score. However, this project is a little different. Everything's super bespoke to further the creative vision for this project and the sound. So while I do have a traditional arrangement on the page of woodwinds, then brass, then strings, you'll see that choir and percussion that live kind of below that, which is typically not where they're placed. And then we end up with a bunch of synthesizers at the end, and then my stems here at the very, very end. But what's going on here in the sessions? Well, the whole project is really about this sense of contrast. So we're going to see broadly two different choices for everything. There's very specific, very minute colors like solo instruments versus ensemble stuff. If we look at our woodwinds, here this is just mostly solo instruments, which we wound up re-recording. But this is the sound we were after, writing those very specific chords, which are not things I would write for anything other than chambering music. This would not work in a traditional orchestral setting. So we have that, but concurrently to that, we have more broad, very big sounding, synthesized, manipulated sounds, brass and woodwind sounds here, which live side by side with the more painterly, small brush strokes that we've heard before. And we have the same thing when it comes to strings, for instance. Look at that. This is solo strings. Of course, this is all doubled by chamber sounds. But the sound I was after was really this juxtaposition of things big and small, close, near, and then far away. And the writing is really representative of those choices. Things like the viola, which you can actually hear in the final in the final mix. That's not really something that you can do with to that degree with a traditional approach. So you'll hear a lot of that. You'll hear also bigger string ensembles. Similarly, in the percussion, there are things that are very close up front and dry with a lot of energy. This shaman low drums thing, and then happening at the same time, we'll have, whoops, something like this. Things are very big, but much farther out, still with a lot of detail. And this is also not a very natural thing. The way I've been working on this was to use things that should sound quite dry, and I've been recorded really up close, but pumping them into, well, a couple of different things. A hall reverb here, handled by cinematic rooms, and then a chamber reverb that's handled by Seventh Heaven. And I'm kind of playing on a super high definition, big ensemble sound, but using really instruments and sounds and samples that are recording very close. And again, I'm playing with that juxtaposition of things that are that shouldn't really exist together. In general, we've looked at the choice for percussion here, but going back to reverbs, whereas on percussion I'm using the Seventh Heaven for tails, here I'm using, that is not the right example, on a lot of those things, yes, I'm using a very highly modulated reverb, something very colorful, very different from Cinematic Rooms in Seventh Heaven, and that is Tai Chi by Reverb Foundry. Which I absolutely love. And these have a lot of modulation in them, a lot of things happening. This is one of the least modulated sounding, least odd sounding things in that arsenal. But the blend here and the idea is to bring something that sounds beautiful, but also sounds a little bit uncanny valley-ish. So you'll see that each instrumental group that ends up in a specific stem needs to have their own reverbs and their own mix bus, right? And by mix bus, I mean these are the stems where everything ends up being summed by foot group with a touch of mastering on here. We have some Soothe, some FabFilter Pro C2, and some Pro Q3. Just a tiny bit of stem mastering here. This is a view of my mixer with all the elements here on the left, and everything that gets summed here to the stems on the right hand side, with the stereo mix being just what it is here. Let's take a quick look at this. Now, we've seen here that I was playing the stereo mix before, and that's the live mix by my mixer, Adam Mihalek, who did an absolutely stunning job on this. And below are the final stems, which have been mastered and augmented by him. Now, there was a very specific way of working on this score that is kind of unique, right? Typically, you would integrate the music at the very end with giving all the elements to your mixer for your mixer to do their own mix from scratch. But here, because we're working kind of on a compressed timeline with the developer, and we also wanted to make sure that everything I was given the audio lead on the project would wind up being replaceable by the live elements. We actually had a stem in, stem out system with my mixer where I delivered all the things I wanted to keep in the music in those stems, send that over to him, and Adam in turn ingested all the live elements that we recorded and kind of funneled everything back into the original stems, right? So you had a stem in, stem out process, which helped us because we were prototyping the interactive music system during the development, and we were able to easily, painlessly, and without making mistakes, we're able to replace the temp assets, which was the output of my stems here, with the final assets, which is all that stuff. Now, on the subject of stems, we've heard some really cool things here on the stereo mix, right? But you can do really exciting things when you start playing with, I don't know, like sub-mixes. See, this is just the vocals with high brass and winds. Then you can mix this to your liking. So that is really helpful when you need to have something of a different size compared to your stereo mix. And clearly something that is needed for video games and pretty much any other media you can think of. Going back to the choices that I've made here, well, there are things that have been very precise, other things or inorganic, and things that have been very big and kind of manipulated and inorganic. And that is really pervasive across the entire score. You'll have things like this, these textures here, chamber strings and my choices of samples, and also a bunch of fake strings that we're going to be using later on. Let me see if I can find some in that cue. Well, maybe not in this one, but let me look at the, oh yeah, let's look at the choir. Things that have been very organic in my choices of samples. Also recorded really up close with reverbs faking things. But in parallel to that, I'm using what I call chopped vocals. Elements that sound odd and really manipulated, which are really fun. Besides all these really acoustic colors, the choirs, the woodwinds, the brass, there's an arsenal of synthesizers playing all sorts of things. And let me solo that for you guys. It's a combination of different tools. You know, I'm using quite a bit of Omnisphere. Sorry for not labeling what's in there exactly. Let me play that. But a bunch of different colors from different things. Omnisphere, Massive, Zebra, Serum, Pigments, Diva. A bunch of different things. And you've heard the music a little bit. And this is really tucked underneath, but it helps convey this eerie quality that we want to portray with the music. I'm also using a bunch of hardware synthesizers, my Novation Peak, the Prophet Rev 2 from Dave Smith Instruments, the Arturia Polybrute, which I love, and then the Virus, which has some really cool textures in there. And you hear those textures that don't feel like they really belong in the music as is individually, especially when we're going to hear things like this. That almost sounds like Eurodance-ish, which is really not the sound you're hearing in the final mix, right? Well, these little sounds, they help propel and give color to the acoustic elements here. And I've done quite a bit of work to integrate the two conceptually. And hopefully they go hand in hand. Things like this. Well, when we play back the mix with everything, obviously you can still hear some of the pulses, but they get blended in with all of the beautiful acoustic percussion there, and they kind of bring out the best of each other, right? It's not a mutually exclusive kind of arrangement there. Those things live together at the same time. Yeah, that was something I was really trying to blend there. The more organic textures, the more obviously synthesized textures, and hopefully the blend of the two ends up somewhere in between. We've talked about the size of the ensemble. We've talked about traditional techniques for playing, for singing the choir, and things that were heavily manipulated, right? We've talked about choices in reverbs and choices of trying to have different things on different planes, kind of push the depth of some of those sounds and kind of offer a really deep and wide soundstage as much as possible. And these are not just choices that I've made to kind of to make the sound better, right? They're in line with the creative of the project, which was to juxtapose this 18th century conquest of a wild world with a completely rampant, untamed flora and animals that have somehow gained some level of consciousness, and how those two things live together. That was really the idea behind bringing such different things. Let me see. Oh, yeah. You know what we're going to do now? I think it's a good time for me to play the music on the piano roll so you can kind of hear what's going on. I'm going to keep just what I see as being most relevant to the sound of the music. Let's keep the choir. Obviously, we're going to keep the strings. I'm not going to keep the hybrid strings. I did find the hybrid strings eventually. Here we go. We're going to play solo cello, solo strings, beautiful French horn, and let's see. Oh, we have some woodwinds here, which we're gonna play that. All these things, and we're just gonna listen to the stereo mix and follow along here. There we go. This is again the main theme for New World, Rise of the Angry Earth. And this is it. Thanks for listening to the main theme for New World Rise of the Angry Earth. My name is Edouard Brenneisen, and this was my Dogcast.
So you can really see how much creative genius goes into such a track. It's incredible how many layers there are, how the selection of the sound already is so important, and then again, how do you mix it? It makes such a huge difference. You have to think in each different layer and imagine how you want your music to be. So you're starting with nothing essentially, and then to make something out of this, to let your creativity flow. It's incredible how there can be such wonderful things created out of nothing. So thank you so much, Edward, for this amazing Dogcast, and for everyone who's interested in more of him, check out his YouTube channel. I link it in the description. And if you stuck around until this point, you might as well follow, press the like button, leave some feedback in the comments what you think of this episode. So that's it for today, and I hope to see you in the next episode.